Hey, how are you doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to get an early look ahead to some Week 10 fantasy football trade targets at the wide receiver position. I've got 5 names that I'm looking to go out and buy right now because of the affordable trade prices that I think that we can acquire these players with and the successful lineup productivity that I see for these guys the rest of the stretch of this season. So, with that being said, we're not going to waste too much more time. Let's hit the intro and get straight in to today's episode. All right, you guys, I lied in the intro. I do want to talk about ThriveFantasy, one of our great partners of the channel, here for a quick second before we jump into T. Higgins. We had yet another profitable week here on the SFS channel with our player prop picks for Week 9 action. In Week 8, we were up like $100. We were just putting, $5 and $10 games. And then here in Week 10, we haven't quite finished off our props because I've got some with players from Monday night, which is happening tonight in them. But it's a really fun way to play daily fantasy. I love playing player props, and I post my player props in the community Discord server for you all to take a look at. And either if you agree with me, you guys can make the picks that I make alongside of me, or if you've got a different take on things, you can obviously do whatever it is you choose. The lines adjust every once in a while, so you might have a different stat outcome than what I have at the time I make my picks. But that's for you guys to go check out when you sign up as a new user on Thrive Fantasy and deposit between $10 and $100 using promo code Sizzle, SIZZLE. They will give you a 100% match bonus. Whatever you put in, they will give you equal to that, again, up to $100. And then on top of that, they will let me know you signed up, and I will help you create a sizzlefantasy.com account and get you set up for a free month of SFS Gold, which is our exclusive membership service here on the channel that gets you access to our weekly rankings, our private DMs in the community Discord. We'll set your lineup for you every single week, and we'll answer your questions whenever you've got them for us. So a lot of great features, a lot of great services that come alongside of creating your Thrive Fantasy account. And again, I will help you in the community Discord server by sending out my player prop picks for given games in a per week basis, and hopefully help you all put some additional cash in your pockets this NFL season. So with that being said, one more time, Thrive Fantasy promo code Sizzle. T. Higgins is our first wide receiver to go out and buy here for Week 10 action. T. Higgins is the forgotten man in this Cincinnati Bengals offense. All the talk, all the rage right now, it's Ja'Marr Chase, it's Joe Burrow. And they had one of their quietest games of this season. Actually, their quietest game of the year, as the Bengals had quite a down performance against the Cleveland Browns. They lost the Battle of Ohio, if you will. And it was ugly from start to finish. Joe Burrow, bad interceptions. The Bengals struggled to move the football, and the Browns ran all over Cincinnati's defense, which through the first roughly half of the season was a pretty underrated rushing defense. And we've seen them over the last couple of weeks now erode and really start to struggle in that phase of the game. After contact, they're actually one of the worst teams in the league. So Nick Chubb, a very physical player, once he breaks one tackle, his explosive ability. He took one to the house 70 yards just purely off of talent and just his explosive ability in the open field. So T. Higgins, though, in this game, where Ja'Marr Chase struggled, Joe Burrow's fantasy output wasn't all that great. T. Higgins had a very quietly productive fantasy game. He's been getting it done the last 3 weeks now. 62, 78, and 97 receiving yards. The last 3 weeks, he's got 9.5 or more fantasy points in half PPR scoring. As a number 2 option in his offense, he's about as good as it gets. This is a very talented player. I think that, again, the amount of attention we're giving to Ja'Marr Chase and the productivity he's having is way outshining T. Higgins in what he is capable and has the potential of doing. He's got the ability to run routes. He has really great field awareness. He makes toe drag catches, is able to win catches at the catch point in a contested catch situation. He's a very whole and well-rounded player. In the red zone, his frame, his size, his vertical jumping ability gives him excellent opportunities to be a red zone weapon for Joe Burrow in this offense. And again, he's seeing number 2 coverage on a weekly basis because now defensive units, defensive coordinators, defensive backs are treating Ja'Marr Chase as the number 1. They're shading safeties his way. They're making sure that Ja'Marr Chase cannot beat them deep. Joe Burrow threw how many passes to Ja'Marr Chase this past weekend on fade routes, but they never were able to really connect on one that stood. They had one nice play that got called back because of penalties. but they weren't able to successfully make that fade route happen because Cleveland was so aware and locked in on preventing that this opens up T. Higgins to have one-on-one coverage almost every play and get his work done on the back end of this unit. So T. Higgins, for a player right now who's a very, very affordable wide receiver, you can go out there. He's not necessarily a buy low or super cheap option, but because he isn't an established premier player and because he isn't someone that has put up gaudy boom numbers this season, you'll be able to go out there, hopefully acquire him for a reasonable price. If you've got questions about what that means for your individual team and your individual leagues, you can drop those down in the comment section below and we'll get back to as many of you as possible. Brandin Cooks is our next must-buy wide receiver for this week. Cooks is a player who, again, kind of flies under the radar here. These are players who have very sneakily good fantasy outings, despite the fact that they're not the players in the center of the attention and not players that we're talking about every single day here or that you hear a ton of news about in the fantasy world. Brandin Cooks has 5 games this season with 12.5 or more fantasy points. We just don't talk about him that much because he plays for the dumpy Houston Texans. This team is getting their starting quarterback now. Tyrod Taylor had his first game back, and it was an ugly game, but he's shaken off the rust. It's a transition process that we saw Dak Prescott even go through this week. In your first game back off of an injury, I never expect a player to produce up to their maximum standard. I never expect them to hit their ceiling in their first game back in a given contest because that's just unrealistic to expect of a player who has got to shake some rust and some dust off and then has to get themselves back into a football mentality, get used to bumping the shoulder pads around, all that good stuff. I expect Tyrod Taylor to, and this isn't that Tyrod Taylor is some elite NFL passer, some super overly dynamic quarterback in fantasy, but I expect him to get back to the production levels he was having the first couple of weeks in this Texans offense and to be overall a better player and a better asset to Brandin Cooks' fantasy value than Davis Mills was. The first 2 weeks of the season, Brandin Cooks had excellent numbers. The first 3 weeks for that matter, but 2 of those were under Tyrod Taylor in this Texans offense. With Tyrod getting more experience, more reps in this Texans offense, getting more calm and collected in the pocket, this isn't a great NFL team. They're going to have a lot of opportunities to pass lots of passes in the direction of Brandin Cooks, get him a lot of volume, and he's explosive. He's a downfield playmaker. He is the best weapon in this Texans offense. He's going to have a lot more productive games this season, and the schedule opens up a little bit here. 4 of his games over the remaining stretch of the season are the Jets, the Seahawks, the Jags, and the Titans. All defensive units that I think Brandin Cooks can have very good boom performances against. And again, if Tyrod and Cooks are able to start connecting on more deep passes, which was something that wasn't as frequent when Davis Mills was under center, that's going to be a big asset, a big tool. You can potentially pick up Cooks as a flex play in a lot of leagues because of how deep the wide receiver position is, and if that's the level of upside you have as your wide receiver 3, I think that's a great place to have Brandin Cooks. Brandon Aiyuk, so back-to-back Brandons here, is our next must-buy player. I loved what I saw from Brandon Aiyuk this week. He did lose a fumble, but it was off of an incredible catch. He went upstairs, grabbed the football, snatched it out of thin air, falls down to the ground, doesn't get contacted, and as he's getting back up to continue running and getting yards after the catch, the ball gets popped out, boom, Arizona Cardinals football. But aside from that, Brandon Aiyuk was on full display. Deebo Samuel was less than 100%. We had George Kittle come back in this offense. We'll talk about that all in just a second here. But I loved the overall flashes I saw from Aiyuk. I loved the talent that was on display, and I loved how they used him here. The passes were a bit high, and Aiyuk was showing an ability to go up and grab them. Again, he went upstairs multiple times in this contest. Even his touchdown was in pretty much double coverage, leaps over the 2 defenders, pulls it down, touchdown 49ers. It was a great contest to see. He looks finally healthy. He's more twitchy, more explosive. The routes are more crisp. This is a really talented player. Say what you will about Deebo Samuel. He had a down game. Some will argue that Deebo Samuel is going to, and because it was a down game, is going to prevent Brandon Aiyuk from seeing these numbers again this season. But what I have to say about this, or about that concept, is that this 49ers offense showed a much more positive brand of football in the passing department than what I've seen throughout the rest of the season. The 49ers have gotten very, very Deebo Samuel dependent, and while that's great on paper, that's excellent for fantasy rosters, That's not how this team should operate. And yes, they did have a loss, and a relatively bad one against the Cardinals this week. But they spread the ball around between their big three pass-catching core, Aiyuk, Kittle, and Samuel. All of them were involved. All of them are incredibly productive, and all of them were able to have marginally respectable fantasy games. Now, I say marginally respectable because Deebo Samuel was the least productive. Again, less than 100%. He was questionable coming into that game, but he was still a lineup-worthy play. George Kittle goes over 100 yards, scores a touchdown. Brandin Aiyuk has his best game of the season, 6 catches on 8 targets, 89 yards, and a score for him. This is how things should look for this 49ers offense going forward. Spread the ball around, get each of these playmakers the football, and don't let defenses key in overly on one player or another, because ultimately you have other options, and you've got a running game as well with Eli Mitchell to keep this thing balanced. So with Kittle, Aiyuk, Samuel, all healthy. Each of these players, I think, have excellent upsides going forward. We said this in the Chicago game last week. When Aiyuk finally started to look fully healthy, that's when we got excited about him going forward as a potentially fantasy relevant and productive player, because we know he has the talent. We saw him get numbers last year. Now it's all coming together here. I think this 49ers offense is going to take steps forward here in the coming weeks because, again, they've unlocked that big three in the passing game, which I think is going to be very, very valuable to have more options than just Deebo Samuel, who, yes, is probably the best fantasy player of the three, and that's the one you probably want on your roster the rest of the season. But that doesn't mean that Aiyuk can't come out here, have some wide receiver 2 level performances, and be a very strong and steady flex play the rest of the way here in 2021. Jaylen Waddle. We've talked a lot about Jaylen Waddle. He's been a popular mention here on the SFS channel, but I can't stop talking about the guy. I love his usage. I love his talent. And his situation is really, really impressive right now. You see that he's putting up numbers, regardless if it's Tua or it's Jacoby Brissett. He's had multiple productive games with each of those quarterbacks under center this season. The volume has also been very, very nice to see. I talked about this a bit last week. Jaylen Waddle is a player who I thought was going to see a low amount of volume in this Dolphins offense in year one and see a high level of efficiency, because I thought he would be the take the top off the defense type player for this Dolphins team. He's been the exact opposite. He is incredibly explosive. He has burners and he's got wheels. If he gets out in space, you might as well kiss him goodbye. But Jaylen Waddle has been an underneath threat, playing a lot out of the slot, but also lined up out wide, catching passes underneath and doing damage in the run after catch department. 8 grabs, 83 yards this week for Jaylen Waddle. In the targets, again, he's collecting this year, he's got 8+ targets in 4 straight games, 10 or more in 3 out of 4 of those games, and then he's got 70+ receiving yards in 3 out of those 4 contests. So the last month of the season has been fantastic for Waddle. He did struggle against Buffalo when Trey White was shadowing him for the majority of that contest, but that's to be expected. Wide receivers that go up against Tre'Davious White tend to have pretty quiet performances. Waddle, though, with the talent, the volume, the situation he's in, if you're playing PPR fantasy football, this is a player you want on your team. He can be a weekly lineup flex option for given fantasy teams. And then finally here, Cole Beasley, yet another target monster. Now, not quite up to the same level of talent as a Jaylen Waddle per se, but still collectively this year, the amount of high volume games he's had has been right around in that same territory. Week 9 tallied Cole Beasley's 4th game of 10 or more targets this season. 8 grabs on 11 targets, only 33 yards. What I can say about that is the Jacksonville Jaguars defense had a fire lit under them this week. What happened there? The Jags upset the Buffalo Bills 9-6 in what was one of the weirdest football games I've watched this season. And Josh Allen was remedied useless because the Jaguars pass rush was giving the Bills a run for their money, snap in and snap out. And Josh Allen owned Josh Allen. If you watch the game, you know what I mean. Josh Allen, the defensive end. Interception, forced fumble, I believe. Sack and a half maybe. He completely just dominated this game. And Cole Beasley was catching. Now you're wondering why. How did he have 8 receptions and only 33 yards? They were throwing him quick little flare routes, quick wide receiver screens, and the Jags corners were flying to the football and tackling him at the point of catch. Not typically something you see from Cole Beasley here, but he's a lot more than that as a player. Typically, we'll see Cole Beasley running routes 10, 15 yards downfield. He can even stretch the field and run vertical if he wants to. He's really, really good at running routes, exploding out of breaks, and just being so shifty the corners can't stick with him. Cole Beasley, someone I believe in this season, especially like a Jaylen Waddle in PPR formats because the volume is so exceptional. He's got 4 games of 60-plus receiving yards. He's got one of the best QBs in the league. Forget this past week. We'll figure out what happened there. Josh Allen is not going to score 9 points or fewer in another contest this season, barring injury. So Cole's someone I feel really confident in, again, in PPR leagues. This can be a really steady producing wide receiver 3 or flex option for your teams, even in 2 flex leagues. Someone I'm looking to get after at all costs here, or not at all costs, because obviously you're not going to overpay for someone like Beasley because, again, he's not an elite level player. But for teams out there who are looking for steady lineup depth or someone to fill that last piece in your lineup that you're looking for, if you can't find a player with a consistent floor, if you can't find a consistently productive piece, Cole Beasley might be the answer for you. I really like his outlook the rest of this year. All right, those were 5 wide receivers I'm looking to go out and buy here in Week 10 action. Again, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to drop down, leave it with a like, and click that subscribe button before you head on out. We'd love to have this community keep growing and to have each and every single one of you watching today's video join the community and ultimately interact with us. We try to be the most interactive fantasy channel out there. We want to answer as many of your questions as possible and ultimately cap this season off with a lot of fantasy championships. Again, one more time before we head on out, check out Thrive Fantasy. Deposit between $10 and $100 using promo code SIZZLE. They'll match you, and you'll get a free month of SFS Gold on us for supporting the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.